Today, I want to talk to you about the very likely potential that there could be a massive amount of turnout this election. We're talking historic levels of turnout, especially for the 21st century, and namely the effect it will have on the Senate. For those of you who don't know, you can go watch my prior video. Um, can't remember its exact name, but basically, mail in ballots are going to doom the Republicans. Early voting has been spectacularly high. To give you an idea, compared to the 2016 election, the amount of early ballots that have been turned in is now equivalent to almost 16% of the vote in 2016. That is legendarily high. In some states, such as Texas, the number is approaching 30%, and they've only had a week of early voting. So, yeah, these numbers could be, to give you an idea, in my last video, which was accurate and uploaded as of yesterday, Texas had 17% of the vote in, roughly, equivalent to their 2016. It is now 27%. Many of those numbers coming from new voters and heavily skewing towards the Democratic Party, indicating at the very least high enthusiasm amongst Democratic voters and lower enthusiasm amongst Republicans. To give you an idea, in 2016, Republicans actually had more mail-in ballots than the Democrats. It was a slim lead, and this was nationally, but they did. Now it's looking like Democrats will far and away lead in mail-in ballots across the country, and we don't know what the final numbers are going to look like until, of course, election days happen, but it looks like we could be heading out for a very high turnout election. And in order to understand why this could really skew the Senate, we need to talk about something called ceilings and floors. So, when it comes to an individual's polling and final numbers in an election, the amount of votes they get, both political parties in basically every state have a ceiling and a floor. The floor is the minimum amount of vote they're probably going to get in an election, while a ceiling is the hypothetical maximum they could get. And for the most part, what we've seen since about 2012, if not 2008, is Democrats don't, in most states, have a very high ceiling. They just rarely get the voter turnout to get there, while Republicans have a very low ceiling but a very high floor, meaning when the Democrats have a very low floor in a state such as Texas, it looks like there's a massive differential, but if the Democrats get higher voter turnout, Texas Republicans hit that ceiling pretty quickly, and the Democrats, hypothetically, could go past them. A state that's the reverse is Oregon. Oregon is famous for having a low ceiling for Democrats, but Republicans rarely ever finding the turnout to beat Democrats and getting a higher, and beating them by getting a higher going above the Democrats' low ceiling to the Republicans' higher ceiling. So the state is normally Democratic. Another state like this, arguably, is Wisconsin, where Republicans just really need voter turnout in order to get the seat. So, the really bad news for Republicans is it seems in all of the 7 seats, these are all states where Republicans seem to have a low ceiling of about, depends on the state, but about 49 per. So, if we're like in Texas, on average, Texas has about 9 million voters, despite the fact there are 17 million registered. Republicans usually win about between 3 million and 4 million, and they seem to have a cap of about 4 million. They can never really break that. Well, Democrats seem to have a floor of about 3 million, and a ceiling that has yet to be seen. Texas is a notoriously low turnout state, and if Democrats can get the vote out in Texas, for example, Beto O'Rourke could have overtaken Ted Cruz if there had been more voter turnout. And like polls and and what we're now learning in current polling says that. We're seeing something similar in Kansas, similar things in Alaska. Georgia, hypothetically. Now, the problem is, these are the only state we know for a fact is Montana, where Republicans seem to have a very, very solid cap at about 48% of the average voter turnout. And the question is, can Democrats beat that? But South Carolina, Georgia, a lot of literally every state besides Montana is a notoriously red state, so we can't really test this theory until election day when we find out does it look like Democrats have a ceiling in a very high turnout election? Because in Texas, it was a higher turnout than normal for the midterm, but it wasn't a high turnout election. Republicans didn't hit their ceiling in the Texas race. That's how low turnout was. We're only looking at about 7 million votes. That's 2 million less than a general election. So the real question is, what's going to happen if, let's say, Democrats increase turnout by 10%? That's a big number, but not one that seems to be out of the realm of possibility now. To give you an idea, if Texas only increases by a third of what it's been doing over the past couple of days, it's going to have 120% turnout compared to 2016. And we're looking at similar factors for a state like Georgia, and the rest of them we don't really have good mail-in ballot information on yet, but both Georgia and Texas are pretty key here. So what you're looking at is a simplified version of my current Senate predictions. If these states aren't, if the state isn't a toss-up, I've just put it as solid for whoever is going to most likely win it. So that's why, like, Alabama and Colorado aren't likely, Iowa's not, leans and stuff like that. So what we'll do is I'm going to put in the current numbers, and then we'll work from there. So we're working in a world where we can imagine we know exactly voter turnout. So let's assume we have 2016 voter turnout. What does this look like? Well, Montana will be tilt. Kansas is leans. Texas is leans. Actually, in 2016 turnout, Texas is likely. Alaska is leans. Georgia is... Maine is leans. The special election is tilt. And South Carolina is, with normal voter turnout, actually likely. Now let's assume Biden performs 2% better. Or Democrats perform 2% better across the board. Just 2% higher voter turnout for the Democrats. At that point, in my opinion, Kansas goes to tilt, Texas goes to tilt, Alaska goes to tilt, Maine goes to tilt, Georgia's special goes to tilt Democratic, our first flip. South Carolina goes to tilt, if I can click properly, and Montana goes to, actually leans Democratic. Montana's a pretty volatile state. If you can get 2% more voter turnout for yourself, you can flip that seat. Already, and for the record, this is a version of the scenario we're looking at currently. Democrats are polling incredibly well and indicating this will be a higher turnout election than 2016. And that's going to give them an advantage, especially in contentious races, namely the special election and Montana's main seat, Senate seat. Now we're going to go a bit further. We're going to assume Democrats get 5% higher than average voter turnout. So keep in mind, not total turnout, just for the Democrats, meaning Republicans in this scenario probably also got 2% higher voter turnout. So Democrats get 5%, Montana goes to likely. Special election goes to leans. Georgia's main election goes to tilt Democratic. South Carolina goes to tilt Democratic. Kansas goes to tilt Democratic. Alaska goes to tilt Democratic. And Texas goes to tilt Democratic. And all of a sudden, the Democrats are close to having a filibuster-proof majority. And here's why this number is really important and why the Democrats really need to run up the score. The Democrats are not as principled a party as the Republicans in the sense of party unity can be more easily shattered. So let's say, for whatever reason, the U.S. House of Representatives, without any issue, passes Medicare for all. All it would take in a 51-seat Senate would be for someone like Joe Manchin to go, well, I'm not voting for that, principles, or I want to win my re-election, etc., etc. And the Democratic Party's not as, like I said, not as a cohesive mass as the Republicans. That sinks the bill. If they have, the more seats they have, the more hall passes they can give to senators who don't want to vote on something. And now I'm going to present to you the doomsday scenario, 10% higher turnout for the Democrats. A totally possible scenario based on the numbers we're seeing, the excitement we're seeing, and where we're seeing it, and the amount of new voters we're seeing turn out. That point. So any flips are not going to be considered likely, or anything past likely, but at that point, Alaska at 10% goes to leans Democratic. Texas goes to leans Democratic. Kansas at that point becomes likely. South Carolina at that point leans Democratic. Georgia's main and special elections both go to lean Democratic. And I'm going to be honest here, Alabama goes to tilt Democratic in that scenario. I am not willing to go more than 10% higher turnout in any U.S. election, but those are bad numbers for the Republicans. We're talking 70-some-odd% turnout rate. Which, as you can see, that's 59 votes. 59 votes, and in 2020, here's where it gets really scary if you're a Republican. The Democrats will have to, of course, defend their wins in the special election in Arizona, but that's not unlikely. They then have room for pickups again in Iowa, because Chuck Grassley's basically guaranteed to resign, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Florida, at this point, the entire South is essentially in play. And you are looking at the potential of the Democrats having a 2/3 majority. That's amendment territory. Sorry about that, my phone went off. But with all that being said, this is why high voter turnout is so scary for the Republicans, because it could mean supreme Democratic control of the Senate for, frankly, the next decade. So, with all that being said, if you like the video, drop a like down below and also a comment. I'm always curious to hear your guys' opinions. If you want to see more from the channel, click the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can be alerted when new content comes out. If you want to hear more from me outside of YouTube, I do have a Twitter, at OneManThinkTan1, the Roman numeral, link in the description. And, as always, and most importantly, have a wonderful day.